November 1939. Germany and the Soviet Union have conquered Poland, and Germany is at war with France and Britain. Moscow is free to do as it pleases in Eastern Europe and sets its sights on Finland, but the Winter War will be a nasty surprise for Stalin. In August 1939, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany sign what they call a non-aggression pact. It includes a secret protocol dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, where each power can act as it sees fit. As planned, they invade Poland together in September, and while Germany turns west, in October the Soviet Union forces the governments of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia to allow Red Army bases on their territory. Moscow's next target is Finland, formerly a part of the Russian Empire. But the resulting Winter War, or Finnish campaign as the Soviets call it, would be far longer and bloodier than Moscow expects. Finnish-Soviet relations have been rocky since Finland declared independence from Russia in 1917. Both countries suffered devastating civil wars after World War I. But while the communist Bolsheviks win in Russia, the anti-communists win in Finland, despite a younger Joseph Stalin's efforts to help the Reds. Some Finns briefly consider trying to acquire the border region of Eastern Karelia, where the culture and people are similar, but a 1920 treaty agrees on the pre-1917 border. Though Finland gains the Arctic port of Petsamo, Moscow, though, still regards Finland as hostile to the revolution, and Helsinki fears the Soviets' territorial and ideological intent. In the 1930s, despite a non-aggression pact between the two countries, the Soviets repress ethnic Finns in Eastern Karelia who had briefly rebelled in the 1920s, and kill many Finnish communists who fled to the USSR after they lost the Civil War. Most historians agree that Stalin wants to reclaim as much as possible of the former Russian Empire and annex Finland, as he does to Eastern Poland, and will later do in the Baltics and Bessarabia. Stalin does worry that the Gulf of Finland and the Baltics are a possible springboard for capitalist powers to threaten the USSR, especially Leningrad, though whether this fear outweighs his desire for conquest is debated. Stalin and his foreign minister, Vyacheslav Molotov, present the Finns with their security demand. They tell Helsinki to allow Soviet bases on its territory, especially on the strategic Hanko Peninsula, to give up territory on the Karelian Isthmus, plus islands in the Gulf of Finland and part of the Rabasi Peninsula, and to destroy their bordery Tainjoila fortifications. In exchange, Finland would receive twice as much mostly uninhabited land in Eastern Karelia. The Finnish government under President Kirsti Kallio discussed the Soviet demands. Military commander Karl Mannerheim wants to compromise, while Foreign Minister Elias Erko doesn't, in case this leads to further Soviet demand. Losing Hanko and the Karelian forts would also make Finland more vulnerable to an eventual attack by the more powerful Red Army, even though most Finns still think Stalin is bluffing. France and Britain, who are at war with Germany, but also oppose Soviet aggression, recommend that the Finns reject the Soviet proposals, since in their view, a Soviet attack is unlikely. Germany tells the Finns to give in, but the Finns don't trust the Germans because of the Nazi-Soviet pact. In the end, talks are broken off with no agreement, though it's unlikely Stalin would be satisfied in the long term, even if Finland had accepted. The Finns hope for support from their Scandinavian neighbors, other great powers, and the League of Nations will deter Soviet invasion. They also believe that if the Red Army does attack, it will take time for it to prepare. The Soviets expect a campaign against Finland will be as quick as that in Poland, and Red Army Chief Commissar Lev Meles believes Finnish workers and peasants will greet the Soviets as liberators. Moscow considers the Finnish army as weak and outdated, and writes off foreign support. Who would help Finland? The Swedes, the British, the Americans. There's no way in hell. There'll be a fuss in the press, moral support, moaning, and whining. But troops, aircraft, cannons, and machine guns? No. As both sides prepare for war, the Red Army falsely claims the Finns shelled one of its positions on November 26. And Moscow rejects Helsinki's offer of an international investigation. On November 30th, 1939, Soviet aircraft bombed the Finnish capital, and the Winter War begins. Militarily, the Finnish army is small, as their initial mobilized force is just 250,000. They're short on artillery, shells, communications equipment, anti-tank guns, and have just 30 tanks. The Air Force has just 114 planes. Meanwhile, the Red Army is undergoing a planned expansion up to 4.5 million men. 425,000 will march on Finland, supported by 2,500 tanks, 2,800 guns, and over 2,000 aircraft. On the other hand, most Finnish unit commanders served in the Tsarist or German armies in Wyrie or in the Finnish Civil War, and the rank and file are well trained. The reserve units know the terrain well, and most are skilled in outdoor survival and marksmanship. The Finnish army is backed up by the Civil Guard and the Latasver, whose all-female personnel served as nurses, in auxiliary functions, and in munitions production. Morale is solid. We are so few, and they are so many. Where will we find the room to bury them all? The Soviet officer corps is weakened after Stalin's executions. Training is poor, especially for winter fighting and ski-borne units, and the armor, infantry and artillery and air power don't know how to work together. The Red Army also doesn't have enough medical units, radios, or winter gear. Morale is also low, as a platoon commander notes in his diary. The troops' political awareness and morale is weakening. They say that supposedly the Soviet government has always said, "We do not want an inch of someone else's land." And now we've started a war with Finland. If we explain that it is necessary to strengthen the borders, they will object that no one attacked us. I myself believe the contradictions with Finland could have been resolved. Red Army Front Commander Kirill Meretskov draws up the Soviet battle plan. He envisions a massive assault against the Finnish Mannerheim Line on the Karelian Isthmus, to push towards the major Finnish cities. Further north, the Soviets hope to drive north of Lake Ladoga and also towards the town of Oulu to cut the country in two at its narrowest point. Supporting attacks include a strike at the Arctic port of Petsamoa. He expects his troops to achieve victory by Stalin's birthday on December 24th. Some Soviet commanders worry that the plan underestimates the terrain and the enemy, but the High Command ignores them. Soviet authorities also deport ethnic Finns, living on their side of the border, to the interior. The Finns have been preparing for a Soviet invasion since the 1920s. Their Mannerheim Line makes use of the swamps, streams, and lakes on the isthmus in the hope of stopping Soviet thrust towards the Finnish interior. But their plan is purely defensive. The Soviets also set up a puppet communist government in waiting under Otto Wille Kuusinen, even though he has little popular support. Moscow now refuses to deal with the legitimate Finnish government, only with its own puppet. This causes most Finns, even those who supported opposite sides in the Civil War, to see the war as one of national survival rather than over territory. Radical leftist Olavi Sipainen rallies to the cause. Now it wasn't a question of whether we were communists or fascists. The political walls within Finland that we had built and done our utmost to uphold crumbled. Then was the moment, a morning that will never cease to radiate its light on us who experienced it. At the front, Red Army units cross the border and reach the Mannerheim line along the Taipale River, where they run into trouble. From December 6th, the Red Army repeatedly tries to break through Finnish defenses, but Soviet infantry and tanks hold tight formations, making them easy targets. The marshy terrain in the area slows the Soviets down, and Finnish artillery and infantry inflict heavy losses. The Soviets have stumbled into a pre-planned killing zone. The guns fire a mixture of shrapnel against the infantry and high explosive to disable armor, usually breaking up an assaulting force within 5 or 6 minutes. The Finnish positions make the most of the terrain and river, and their heavy weapons are well camouflaged. The tanks, though, are a particular challenge for the Finns, who use cluster grenades, satchel charges, and even pry off tracks with crowbars. They also use bottles of flammable alcohol with cloth fuses, known as Molotov cocktails. Finnish soldier Carlo Erho recalls a comrade's lone action against a Soviet tank. He calmly lit the fuse and threw the bottle toward the last tank. It hit just behind the air intake slots and immediately caught fire, reflecting the surrounding area with its yellowish flame. Soon the entire tank was enveloped in fire, and Kivy Verta said, "Broiled Russians for sure." Soviet attacks in the area peter out by December 27th. Their attempts to break the line around Kala also fail. This is the area where famous Finnish sniper Simo Heihea is most active. He's later given the nickname the White Death, though he's known in Finland at the time as the Magical Marksman. He claims 500 kills, which would make him the most successful known sniper in history. An even more dangerous White Death for Red Army soldiers is the winter. In December, temperatures drop to as low as -40 degrees. And since their winter gear and logistics capabilities are severely lacking, the Soviets suffer terribly from cold and hunger. Thousands simply freeze to death at their position. The conditions and weapons supply problems also take their toll on Finns, like Vesteri Lepisto. There was always a lack of ammunition. Our hand grenades, produced in 7 different countries, were really hazardous. Our lives were at stake every time we used them. Our most aggravating work was getting out there in 40 below zero, right in front of the enemy lines, to set up barbed wire barricades. We had to work without gloves, and we dared not make any noise. Everything was done at night, so the Finns have stopped the Red Army on the Mannerheim line where a stalemate sets in. Elsewhere, though, there's plenty of movement. Near Lake Talvajärvi, Finnish units counterattack on December 12. The many frozen lakes, thick fog, and broken ground make it hard for the Soviets to use their air power and tanks effectively. The Red Army had nearly cut off the defenders when it arrived a few days before, and now its cold and hungry soldiers are enjoying sausage stew from captured Finnish field kitchen. A scratch force of Finnish staff officers and other non-combat personnel attacks them at night, inflicts heavy casualties, and stops the Soviet drive. They also capture Soviet artillery, machine guns, and T-26 tanks. The so-called Sausage War is the first Finnish offensive victory of the war, and they suffer 350 casualties while inflicting up to 5,000. In central Finland, the Soviet Ninth Army's 50,000 troops far outnumber the 11,000 Finnish defenders, but it's inexperienced and poorly trained. It has very few skis and very few men who can ski, so it advances in long, vulnerable columns along the few forested roads towards the town of Suomussalmi, which it takes on December 7. That day, Finnish writer Olmari Kihanto writes in his diary, "The evening was extremely beautiful in the village of Suomussalmi when the Russians attacked it. White snowy fields were twinkling, stars in the sky were glimmering, the northern lights were calmly shimmering. Then some kind of indistinct hum, and then the roar of military guns, the flame rising to the height of the fire. and reflected as if in a magic mirror of eternity. Why did this happen? Why did the Finns have to defend their country with blood? And what servant of the devil sent the Russians here, who were probably peace-loving people? Sent them to destroy our homeland. Soviet units then move west, but they overextend themselves. A mixed Finnish force of regular troops, border police, and civil guards counterattack and cut the vital Raiti road to stop Soviet forces from joining up. Over the next several weeks, the Finns will apply what will become known as Matti tactics to this and other columns. Matti is a block of firewood, and the Finns plan to cut the Soviet column into similar isolated blocks so they can destroy them one at a time despite their inferior numbers. Finnish units move quickly through the thick forests and snipe or ambush at will. The forests hamper Soviet firepower, and the confusion and poor road network mean the Red Army can barely move up enough rations and ammunition. Soviet troops caught along the road are confused, starving and freezing, and they never know when or from what direction the next ambush will come. Groups of Red Army soldiers try to flee through the woods, but the Finns cut them down or make them prisoner. Some Mattis give up without any combat, as they cannot move and have no shelter or food. The remnants of the Soviet 44th Division try to break out, but the Finns wipe them out by January 8. The Soviet commander escapes to friendly lines, though his superiors have him executed later. The Battle of Suomussalmi is a clear Finnish victory. They stopped the Soviet advance in central Finland, inflict about 25,000 casualties, while only suffering 2,700, and destroy 43 tanks, 260 trucks, along with other valuable equipment and weaponry. Meanwhile, in the far north, the few Finnish forces available fight hard but cannot stop the Red Army from taking Petsamo on December 2. The Soviet invasion has ground to a halt, and Stalin acknowledges the situation. The war in Finland is a serious war, sharply different from our autumn campaign in Poland. Diplomatic activity, though, continues. The League of Nations expels the Soviet Union at the start of the war, which puts pressure on Stalin. He's losing prestige, and he's internationally isolated. Meanwhile, the Red Air Force continues to pound Finnish cities, especially Viipuri, which they hit with 12,000 bombs. The Red Army adapts. Critics of the original plan, like Boris Shaposhnikov and Simeon Timoshenko, take charge of the war. Timoshenko is responsible for breaking the Mannerheim Line, but for now, he stops frontal assaults and orders his forces retrained in combined arms operations. Reinforcements bring troop numbers up to 600,000, along with more tanks and guns to replace losses. The Finns do not have any more reserves, though they have gotten some help from abroad. About 12,000 foreign volunteers join the Finnish cause, mostly from Sweden, but also from the US, Britain, Norway, Estonia, Hungary, Italy, and other countries. Notable names include future Norwegian resistance leader Max Manos and British actor Christopher Lee. French, British, Americans, Italians, and Swedes also send some aircraft, weapons, and non-lethal aid, with Sweden contributing a unit of Gloucester Gladiators and anti-aircraft artillery. However, neither the volunteers nor the military aid is enough to equalize the situation on the battlefield. On February 1st, the Soviets try the Mannerheim Line again with more firepower. This time, they focus more on the Viipuri Gateway, a heavily defended gap in the lakes and marshes around the town of Summa. Soviet guns fire over 300,000 shells the day before the assault, and Red Army troops also storm the entire length of the line to prevent Finns from reinforcing the gateway. After 10 days of vicious fighting with many positions changing hands several times, The Soviets break through and send their armor through the gateway. Soviet artillery officer Nikolai Voronov recalls the combined armed success. A hurricane of our bombs and shells descended on Suma. I was at a forward observation post. After the artillery had shifted its fire to the required depth, infantry and tanks simultaneously attacked and began to advance successfully. This time, the enemy did not hold out. His flanks were in danger of encirclement, and he began to retreat. The strong point fell before my eyes. The Finns fall back to the interim line of defense, but the Red Army crosses it by February 28th. And although fierce Finnish resistance continues, including on other sectors of the front where there are still mounting Soviet columns, they cannot stop. The Red Army drive towards Viipuri and Helsinki-Kauga. Meanwhile, in February and early March, some British and French politicians argue they should intervene to help the Finns, potentially alongside Norwegian and Swedish troops, since they view the Soviets as an ally of Nazi Germany. Winston Churchill praises Finnish resistance as sublime and superb, and French Premier Édouard Daladier mentions the overly optimistic number of 50,000 troops. London and Paris do discuss the possibility of sending ground troops into Finland, a naval attack on Soviet ports, or attacking Soviet oil production in the Caucasus or Crimea, perhaps sparking a Ukrainian revolt. But they mistakenly expect Finland can hold out until May. The Allies, though, are already at war, and even supporters like French socialist politician Alexandre Varenne have doubts. We are at war with Germany, which remains our principal concern. We are to be brought to also fight against the immense Soviet Empire. We'd have to be given a reason to do so, and it would have to be compelling. Norway and Sweden also refused to let Allied troops pass through their territory in response to German threats. Still, Stalin is afraid of possible Allied military intervention and wants to end the conflict as soon as possible, so talks with Finland begin on March 6. At the front, Finnish troops put up a bitter fight in Viipuri, but the Soviets forced them out and destroy much of the city by March 11. Finnish General Heinrichs admits that the situation is lost. It is my duty to report that the present state of the army is such that continued military operations can lead to nothing but further debilitation and fresh losses of territory. On March 12, 1940, Finland and the USSR sign the Treaty of Moscow, and the Winter War is over. Finland gives up 10% of its territory, mostly in the southeast and far north. 420,000 Finns flee the annexed regions. It must also lease the Hanko Peninsula to the Soviets for 50 years for them to use as a naval base. The Winter War has been short but bloody. About 25,000 Finnish troops are killed and 43,000 wounded, while the Soviets lose about 126,000 dead and 264,000 wounded. The Finnish Air Force and anti-aircraft guns take down 579 Soviet planes, while losing just 53 of their own. Soviet bombing raids kill and wound about 900 Finnish civilians. Finnish resistance, and partly the danger of Allied intervention, convinced Stalin to back off from his initial goal of full control and regime change in Finland. But even limited success makes the Soviets more confident. Defeating the Finns is not a great task. The main thing on our victory is that we defeated the technique, tactics, and strategy of the great European states, who were the teachers of the Finns. That is our main victory. In Germany, the war strengthens Adolf Hitler's desire to attack the USSR. He sees it as proof that Stalin's Great Terror fatally weakened the Red Army and that the Soviet Union is unprepared for war. Finland has preserved its independence but experiences a national trauma. The suffering of the Finnish population under Soviet bombing and the ethnic cleansing of the annexed regions leads to lasting bitterness. One Soviet soldier remarks, "The Finns are not mean. They just really hold a grudge. They remember who's done them harm in the past. God forgives. The Finns do not. Less than a year later, the two countries will be at war again." The nature of the Winter War, with its unforgiving climate, the vastness of the battlefield, and the different doctrines of the Finns and the Soviets, made it one of the most unique conflicts of the Second World War. On a tactical level, battles like Suomussalmi or Tovajärvi demanded from the Finns everything at their disposal, while the Red Army had to adapt to this unexpected type of warfare. If you want to experience what it's like to make tough decisions on the Finnish battlefields, check out Winter War by Wargame Design Studio. Part of the Squad Battle series, Winter War is a hex-based wargame that lets you experience the entire campaign from either the Finnish or Soviet side in an unparalleled level of depth. Take control of meticulously researched squads and vehicles, use their authentic equipment, and take the environments of each of the 24 unique battlefields into account to beat your opponent. Winter War can be played against a computer or against other players. So head over to wargamades.com pages/realtime history and use the code. That's just $29.97 for real-time history viewers. The game will be delivered via direct download, and your purchase includes the full game, as well as detailed orders of battle, extensive documentation for vehicles and weapons, a scenario editor to customize the game, and a digital copy of William Trotter's book on the war. Again, that's wargamades.com/pages/realtime history to get your copy of Winter War by Wargame Design Studio. We want to thank Sofia Shirogorova for her help with this episode. If you want to learn more about the Second World War in 1940, check out our previous documentaries about the Battle of Britain and the Battle of France. As usual, you can find all the sources for this video in the description below. And if you're watching this video on Patreon or Nebula, thank you so much for the support. We couldn't do it without you. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is a production of Real Time History, the only history channel that doesn't want to attend a Molotov cocktail party or a sausage war.